classically, this is an example. The Rio UNCED had said that actions for poverty reduction and environmental improvement are mutually reinforcing, and that we must address that linkage. In fact, NREG in India addresses that linkage because of the fact that it provides employment in the short term and livelihood security, and in the medium term, that investment goes to rebuild the resource base. So it's a perfect example of addressing the linkage between environment degradation or vice versa, environment improvement and poverty reduction. This particular the part of the UNCED, I think conference was in 82, sir. This has not been operationalized in the world. I mean, this is one of those things because it applied to poorer countries, so it was not operationalized. These things are now back on the table. So the Green India mission, in fact, in our country, the environment development debate is a zero-sum game. What is lost to the what is it gain for development is seen to be a loss to the environment. We need to reverse this. And the Green India mission, where you have people who have surplus labor energy waiting in the, living in the vicinity of the forest dwelling communities, the tribes, they need work. And we have yet to find effective ways of engaging them in activities of environmental rehabilitation or improvement or afforestation. So this Green India mission, which is a very ambitious target, I don't know if Mr. Jairam Ramesh in the morning spoke to you about it, they are planning to do something like 10 million hectares. It will be the world's largest afforestation program. It's 50% of it to be done by afforestation, 50% by preventing, 50% by improving the density of existing forests. So the Green India mission, in fact, would be if it works well, we would have found a solution to both, to many of the problems that we are facing today, the tribals being the most vulnerable in terms of their poverty indicators, the fact that there is extremist movements there, all these kinds of issues get addressed through an effective implementation of the Green India mission. This is an overview of the 8 missions that, and I think I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. I need to ask all the gentlemen here a few questions, notably, especially since Mr. Gopalakrishnan has outlined the various policies and programs of the government. We need to address the issue of why there's such a disconnect between what the policies profess and the actual implementation of the policies on the ground. And I think I would have a few questions for each of the panelists before I throw this discussion open to the floor. And I would like Mr. Basu to focus, he talked about the key challenges to take knowledge to ordinary farmers. He said this is the key challenge. He said it's not an issue of, what the scientific community is doing, what researchers are doing, but ensuring that the knowledge that has been created is disseminated among those who need that knowledge. Now, what are the gaps? Why are we not able to do this? This is not the first time we've heard this, sir. We've been hearing this for many decades. If you can specifically say what now needs to be done.
Yeah. As I mentioned, this is the biggest challenge confronting us today. And we have an extension system. In the structure in the country, as you know, is that state really is responsible for agriculture. It's a state subject. The center comes in only with broad policy and certain amount of interventions through programs and schemes. So we have to depend ultimately on the state machinery for extension. Unfortunately, over the years, the emphasis had been lost. So a few years back, the center then introduced a scheme to incentivize the states to look at extension through a model which is popularly now called Atma model. We tried that out for 3-4 years. We have taken a stock of whether the Atma model worked or didn't work, and we have strengthened it only last year. And now the weakness that we found was that again in the old Atma model we were depending on the state to provide the personnel that was missing. So therefore, in the revised program that we have introduced, we have provided for the states to add personnel at the block level, at the district level, and when I say personnel, these are technical personnel who will be actually able to guide the farmers on crop systems, on animal husbandry and fishery issues. Now this is picking up. Now this is the effort that is going on through a program on extension, but apart from that we have excellent models which have been developed by some of the states. For instance, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, they have excellent extension models, as a result of which there are immediate improvement in production and productivity which we are seeing in these states. Now we have advised the other states to try and replicate those models in those states. And that effort is going on our part to persuade the other states to pick up the good practices and use that model. The third development, a very happy development, is that now the private sector has developed certain excellent models. In fact, in the Indo-US dialogue, the US officials informed us that they would like to study some of the models that we have developed, so then that can be applied to maybe some countries in Africa. So these, the e-Chopal or other models that has come up from the private sector are working very well. Of course, they need to be tremendously scaled up. So what we did this time is that we have said in our scheme, any state government wants to involve the private sector, you are free to do so. And when I say private sector, it includes NGOs or any other bodies like that. And the state government is free to do so. So we have just tried it out for 1 year. So we really do not know the impact that has happened on the ground. The third, just one last thing, the last part is using information technology. Advantageously, we have now kind of jumped few years and we have tremendous information technology potential in the country. So Kisan call centers, then Kisan management centers, using mobiles, and it works very well. Just to give an example, in Maharashtra, we had a serious pest problem in soybean and pomegranates, and they developed this model based on IT of informing the farmers, supplemented with some ground stuff. As a result, for the last 2 years, there has been no damage to that crop. But I agree with you, the huge scaling up is required. And on that backbone, we will have to reach the issues of climate change to the farmers so they are better informed.
Professor Brahmachari, going on, taking off from where Mr. Basu concluded, again, we've heard this phrase lab to field for, I think, ever since this country became independent. We've been hearing it for so long. We've also been hearing about field to fork. But once again, there seems to be a disconnect between what is done in the laboratories to actually ensuring that these practices are followed by farmers. The adaptation to local conditions, as Mr. Dhruv Vijay Singh pointed out, the fact that we are dealing we are in a country which is extremely heterogeneous, extremely diverse, not just with different agroclimatic zones, but different social and economic conditions. So this whole bridging the gap between the lab and the field, maybe you can comment a little bit about that.
We were discussing solar, and if one goes back and looks record, in 70s, our National Physical Laboratory was a leader in solar energy. Dr. A.P. Mitra's time was the first to talk about carbon footprint with respect to methane generation, and he demonstrated that 1/10 of actually what was projected by US was actually, it's all 70s. But we didn't take it seriously. We didn't realize this will be the future. So I look back, the record of the Planning Commission, that those projects were not viable because petroleum was cheap. So I think implementation will take place. I don't think rural India is waiting for South Bloc, North Bloc to eventually do anything. Rural India, according to me, will do. Because you have no idea how many hundreds of farmers and people actually visit laboratories and take things. They are really not waiting for anybody. It is, please understand, do not underestimate people of India. People of India do not need MOU to collect. So that's why CSIR 800 was having a problem, because our audit will ask for technology transfer fee. We said just make it free. Once we have made it free, anybody takes any technology, and that is possible. The difficulty is, many things in implementation, our biggest difficulty is that we ourselves have created wrong incentive schemes. If you want to give free electricity and free water, you go back to the policy of Kautalya Shastra. Water was a state property. Water was not individual property. You cannot drill water, take water of the pond, belong to your place. It was a state property. But today it is not. Okay? Therefore, I can drill water and take away all the water of the neighbor, because I have the machine to go bigger and bigger and drop out. So it is important that we need to look at to reach. But my feeling is, as more empowering is taking place through the ICT network, through the information to the masses, things are changing. Somebody mentioned about wiki model, there was a mention of the wiki. Basically, can you collect and put all these open innovations into non-patented technologies availability to make people aware of it? That itself people will take, energy efficiency, whatever local variations you can create. So I am very clear that the electronic communication tool is the biggest tool by which information can dissipate.
Yeah. In fact, Mr. Gopalakrishnan talked about the need to, he said shortly, all information on water will be in the public domain. We'll wait, we'll see how short is short. We know how expeditiously sometimes the government works. I'll have a few questions for you. But Mr. Dhruv Vijay Singh, you talked about the diversity of this country. You talked about the need to build policies from bottom up, not top down kind of policies, and the need to cater to local needs. This point that Professor Brahmachari made, you talked about how people are crying, fighting, shouting, screaming, water conservation easier said than done. This whole issue of pricing of water, or at least incentivizing better utilization of water. I mean, many would argue that this has been independent India's biggest failure, that our inability to manage our water resources as efficiently as we should have. And you're talking about in the next 7 years increasing the water usage efficiency by 20%. The question I have is, why have we been unable to replicate best practices even within our country?
Good question. Why have we been unable to replicate best practices within our country? I think one reason seems to be that there is a lot of bureaucracy which does seem to be stopping some replication. I'll give you an example. The Delhi educational system, where all the teachers are on the rolls on computer, you can check if they're attending, how many students are there, they're followed, their marks are followed, everything. Very good system. We asked Goa, why don't you replicate this system? Though this is not linked to, but I'm just talking of replication. Goa said, very good idea. The whole team went there, they sat there for 2 months, then they said, but listen, we've got another scheme coming in which is very similar. And this is funded by such and such an agency, and I don't think so we'll take this, maybe ours will be better. And this new scheme has been piloted by the Chief Secretary, who thinks that this one which is coming in is not very good. It just fell between the cracks, and the team came back from Delhi, which had gone from here, to try and replicate this system. So there is a problem, maybe with the bureaucracy, maybe with and it was not the senior, I think it was just one of those things. You've raised this point about implementation of policy. I have this feeling that there is policy nowadays is very easy. In fact, your internet is there, you do a cut and paste job and you've got a lovely policy. It's not very difficult. The only, what I feel is that there is no developing and there is no developed nation. The difference between developed and developing nations is that developed nations implement their policy and developing nations try and implement that policy. The moment we make a policy and implement it, I think we will be a developed nation.
That's good that it comes from a bureaucrat. Until we were recently told by Barack Obama that we are no longer an emerging economy. We have emerged. We were told, but it's good to get that reality check every now and then. Mr. Gopalakrishnan, in the Prime Minister's office, one of your jobs is to coordinate the working of ministries. This is supposed to be the bane of all bureaucracies. The left hand usually doesn't know what the right hand does, and there's so many layers in the hierarchy that it is guaranteed to diffuse accountability. So if something works, everybody takes credit for it. If something doesn't, nobody is responsible. So in the PMO, maybe you can throw some more light also on these related issues about our inability to replicate best practices. You come from Kerala. If the whole of India had Kerala's healthcare indicators, our healthcare indicator would be superior to that of the United States of America, certainly far ahead of China.
Clearly, we have not done a good job in terms of implementation, but we also need to relook at when we talk about implementation as our failure and policy as the desirable. There must be something wrong in the policy that does not get implemented. So they're not two exclusive categories. Two, I don't want to go back to history, but I'll just say one line. Uneven development has been the inheritance of all post-colonial countries. So you have highly differentiated situations in states, within states, and when you try to do policy, somehow policies tend to subscribe to homogenization and standardization. These run into problems. That's why somewhere in the 80s we got it right in terms of at least the macros that we need to be working as a decentralized Panchayati Raj municipal bodies run country rather than South Block and North Block and state governments. Even within states there is so much differentiation. So first of all, I would argue against this thing of wanting to replicate. What is replicable should be replicated. What is not replicable need not be replicated. It's not that something that works in Assam will work in Kerala, because what we call a district in India is actually a province in Europe. Our sizes are if you talk in terms of population. So we have a very highly differentiated thing, and I used to interact with Dr. Prahlad, who passed away, and one of the world's most interesting strategic thinkers. He used to always say, we must abandon this idea of best practice. He said a country of 1 billion plus people should look at next practice, not best practice. So you should be constantly innovating on what is relevant for a particular area. So I think my simple point on replication is policies are not cookie cutter models. They need to get refined to situations. And that is why if you really look at, I'll close with just this, just look at the NREGA with all its defects, the fact that there are, it after all uses the same system of the government of multiple levels of delivery and all that. In spite of that, it works because the government of India here performs only two functions. One, it has defined the core components of NREGA under an act. Okay? Which means it's a citizen's right. The core components are enshrined in law. And the entire implementation is then decentralized to be done by the panchayats. But this is the direction to go. The government of India can provide the funds, government of India should provide the normative framework, and it should become a good evaluator. But the actual action should be with communities, local leadership. Thank you.
May I ask you one more question, Mr. Gopalakrishnan? You talked about the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which is the world's largest social security scheme of its kind. It's today gone beyond the classic model of John Maynard Keynes. You know, people only remember him saying that in a depression you must give people money to dig holes and fill them up again, so long as you put incomes in the hands of people. The quality of the assets that are created by the NREGA, you know, what's the use building a road if it gets washed away in the next monsoon? The absence or the inability of the so-called social audit to take place. Would you say these are some of the biggest constraints which are today preventing the NREGA from really realizing its full potential, and not just, you know, job creation 100 days a year?
Good question, Panjay. The problem with the NREGA is that, see, we are trying to implement a rights-based act in a society which is still to get into, you know, which is not totally literate, which has got which is, especially if you look at where the NREGA is needed most, they are the weakest in terms of other enabling conditions like literacy and various other issues, which would have made the rights of the citizens come up front and you know, claim what is their due. That defect remains. What is the second question about?
Ensuring that, you know, the quality of the assets are good.
The quality of
social,
assets, yes.
the social audit takes place.
There's an article that Kaushik Basu wrote long back about the employment programs as roads that get washed away. In fact, it's very interesting. If you look through the NREGA thing, which is on the net, road building is a very low priority in the NREGA works, because we have a massive program called the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, which is asphalted roads, incidentally, in villages. So road building takes a very small amount of the NREGA investment. 65% of investment under NREGA is just on water, and another 15% is on land. So ideally, you know, if these are ideally spent, the bulk of the NREGA expenditure will fall into what I would like to call a green account. I mean, since we are talking climate change, if a green accounting of the NREGA is done, it'll, I mean, even I would say that globally among development investments, it will have a very, very strong green account in terms of investing in water and land. It has a provision for improving private farmlands of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, now extended to people below the poverty line. And many states are doing this rather seriously. So we have an opportunity to improve. See, like Mr. Basu said, the production did not slip in spite of the failure on rainfall. One is, of course, we are doing things better. That's one part. Other is the production is coming from the well-landowed areas, and the drought-prone areas are not contributing to too much in the flood. So there, whatever the situation, is not making a change in the production. But with this improvement of private farmland under NREGA, it's a very major contribution. It can contribute significantly to increasing agricultural production, or at least stabilizing it from deficit areas.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. I think it's time for this discussion to be thrown open to everybody present over here. My only request is, please identify yourself before you ask a question. We would prefer that you keep your comments brief, your questions pointed. If you have a question to ask of a specific member of the panel, please direct it towards him. Yes, sir. Yes.
My name is Manavalan. I represent an organization called Action for Food Production. My question is to Secretary Agriculture. Now, when you're talking about various processes involved in sustainable agriculture, how do you deal with this with the state government? And I believe that sustainable agriculture, as far as land and water is concerned, is within the domain of the Land Resources Department of the Rural Development. It is not exclusively with agriculture. How is agriculture going to make that these processes are actually to the voices of the people and make it sustainable, make it inputs of required technologies? How do you react to this?
Okay.
Connected with this, when you talk about vulnerabilities, vulnerability is one of the main reasons of the risks of the farmers in agriculture, and that's the main reason priority lending of credit is not reaching to the farmers, thereby productivity is not taking place. And with this new dimension of microfinance, the confusion of microfinance, I personally feel that climate change experiences and the voices is a very important factor to reduce their risks. And you should have risk template given to the bankers, to the credit giving institutions, to see that there should be a mechanism by which these risks are minimized before credit is given to the small farmers, thereby he is sure of getting his crop and prepayment of the credit taken. Can you react to this?
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Basu.
The first question, that is on how do we plan to actually roll out the sustainable agriculture program that we are talking of, and how do you coordinate with the land resource department and even in fact rural development department, because the big chunk of it is coming from NREG as well, apart from the IWDP program. Now I think Gopal mentioned a few minutes back, what we have done 3 years back, as I mentioned, it's a state subject. We have to operate through the state machinery. Earlier on, it used to be pretty centralized, all our interventions. So what we did through an elaborate scheme of Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana, and it's one of the biggest schemes of Government of India, 25,000 crores have been earmarked for the 5-year plan, and every year the allocation is going up. We did 2 things. We said it has to be based on planning, and it has to be based on district planning. And then at the level of the state, some kind of aggregation of the district plan, and the state develops the agriculture strategy for the state. Unless you do that, you don't get any assistance. So that has brought in a discipline of preparing district plans, and bulk of the states have prepared these district plans. It gets into nitty-gritties of what are the agri-climatic zone, what are the crops which are going to benefit. It doesn't only talk of crops, it talks of land development, it talks of water, it talks of animal husbandry, fishery. It's comprehensive when we do that. Now the second thing that we said is that we don't want to take decisions on your behalf. Once you have developed a strategy and there is an agreement between us broadly on the strategy that you are adopting, we have delegated the power to the state level committee, which is chaired by the chief secretary and which has members from all relevant departments. So the coordination takes place there. And the committee there decides what it wants to do out of those district plans and out of the state plan and implements it. It has worked wonders. I am not saying this because I am a Secretary Agriculture, but I have actually gone round the countryside and seen the excellent results of this delegation, decentralization in planning, in projectization, in implementation. If you go to Maharashtra in the Vidarbha belt, if you go to Tamil Nadu, each one has developed a strategy very relevant to what is required there. Bihar has its own strategy. Bihar seed replacement rates used to be one of the poorest. If you go now, you will find the seed replacement rate has improved. Same is Odisha, same is Chhattisgarh. So that, in my view, has been of tremendous help. The other little trick that we played there is the allocation is linked to 3 parameters. One is how much dry land area you have. That is to give focus to dry land areas. So the money you get depends on the ratio of dry land areas. The other is